My story begins not with the man you might expect, but with another, a sea captain named Robert Walton. This brave man was writing letters to his sister, Margaret, in England. He told her of his great adventure. He was leading a ship far to the north, into the cold and icy seas of the Arctic. Captain Walton was a man of great ambition. He dreamed of being the first person to reach the North Pole. He wanted to discover a new way for ships to travel and to find out the secret of the magnetic needle. He was willing to risk everything for this knowledge and fame, even his own life and the lives of his crew. As the ship sailed further north, it became trapped in the thick ice. The fog was so dense that the sailors could see nothing around them. One day, through a break in the mist, they saw a strange sight. A huge figure, larger than any man, was seen driving a dog sled across the ice at great speed. It soon vanished into the distance, leaving the men to wonder what they had seen. The next morning, the ice had broken up a little, and the sailors found another man. This man was nearly frozen to death, weak and starving, and his sled had only one dog left alive. He was a European, unlike the giant figure they had seen before. The crew brought the stranger aboard their ship. They gave him warm clothes, food and drink to help him recover his strength. Captain Walton was very curious about this man. He was clearly educated and spoke with great sadness, but he would not say why he was so far from home in this dangerous place. He only asked which way the ship was going. When Walton told him they were headed north, the man seemed very disappointed. He explained that he was chasing someone who had run away from him. This only made Captain Walton more interested in the stranger's story, as he had been looking for a friend to share his thoughts with on this long journey. After some time, the stranger began to trust Captain Walton. He saw that the captain also had a great and dangerous ambition, much like his own. He decided to tell Walton his incredible and terrible story, hoping it would be a warning. He wanted the captain to understand the dangers of seeking knowledge that humans are not meant to have. The stranger's name was Victor Frankenstein, and he began to tell the tale of his life, a life that was once full of happiness but had been destroyed by his own ambitions and creations. And so, on that lonely ship surrounded by ice, Captain Walton listened to one of the most frightening stories ever told. Victor Frankenstein began his story by speaking of his family and his happy childhood in Geneva. His father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was a respected man who had married a kind woman named Caroline Beaufort. Victor was their first child, and they loved him very much. His parents were gentle and caring, and they gave him everything he needed. They travelled often, and it was on a trip to Italy that they found a beautiful little girl living with a poor family. Her name was Elizabeth Lavenza, and she had bright golden hair and a sweet nature. Victor's mother decided to adopt her, and she brought Elizabeth home to be a sister and companion for Victor. Victor and Elizabeth grew up together like brother and sister, and they were very close. Victor thought of Elizabeth as a precious gift that he must protect and cherish. His childhood was filled with joy and love. Soon another person joined their happy family, Henry Clerval. Henry was Victor's best friend, and they were as close as brothers. While Victor was serious and loved to study, Henry was full of life and imagination. He loved stories of adventure and romance. The three of them, Victor, Elizabeth and Henry, spent their days playing and learning together, their lives untouched by sadness or worry. It was a perfect beginning to a life that would later be filled with so much struggles and pain. As Victor grew older, he became very interested in science. He didn't care for the modern science that his father tried to teach him. Instead, he found old books written by ancient philosophers and alchemists like Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus. These writers promised to reveal great secrets, such as how to turn metal into gold or how to live forever. Victor was fascinated by these ideas. He spent many hours reading their works, dreaming of making a great discovery that would change the world. He wanted to understand the very secrets of heaven and earth, to learn what gives life to things. One day, when Victor was a teenager, he saw something that changed his life forever. A powerful thunderstorm raged over their home. During the storm, a bolt of lightning struck a great oak tree near their house. The lightning was so strong that it completely destroyed the tree, leaving nothing but a thin, black stump. Victor was amazed by this display of nature's power. A man of science who was with his family explained the principles of electricity to him. This event made Victor abandon his old studies of alchemy and turn his mind to the new and powerful science of electricity and chemistry. He now had a new and dangerous goal: to discover the secret of life itself. When Victor was 17 years old, his mother, Caroline, caught scarlet fever while caring for Elizabeth, who was also sick. Elizabeth recovered, but his mother, Caroline, did not. On her deathbed, she called Victor and Elizabeth to her side. She told them that her greatest wish was for them to marry one day and to take care of the younger children in the family. Her death was the first real sorrow Victor had ever known, and it filled him with grief. Soon after this sad event, it was time for Victor to leave his home in Geneva and go to the University of Ingolstadt in Germany to continue his studies. His friend, Henry Clerval, wanted to go with him, but Henry's father would not allow it. At the university, Victor met two important professors. The first, Monsieur Krempe, a professor of natural philosophy, told Victor that all the time he had spent studying the old alchemists was a waste. He said their ideas were foolish and outdated. This made Victor feel discouraged. But then he met another professor, Monsieur Waldman, who taught chemistry. Monsieur Waldman was a kind man who saw Victor's passion. He agreed that the old alchemists had promised too much, but he said that modern scientists had achieved real wonders. He encouraged Victor to study chemistry and all the branches of natural science, and his words filled Victor with new excitement and ambition. Victor threw himself into his studies with an energy that surprised everyone. He spent all his time in the laboratory, learning everything he could about chemistry and the human body. He wanted to know what made life possible. He studied how the body was built and how it decayed after death. He spent days and nights in charnel houses and graveyards, examining dead bodies to understand the process of decay. This work was grim and unpleasant, but Victor was driven by his obsession. After 2 years of tireless work, he finally made his great discovery. He found the secret to creating life. He learned how to give life to non-living matter. Filled with a mad excitement, Victor decided to use his new knowledge to create a living being. He thought that if he could create life, he would be like a god. He decided to make a creature of gigantic size, about 8 feet tall, because it would be easier to work on the larger body parts. He began to collect his materials from butcher shops, dissecting rooms, and graveyards. For months he worked in secret in a lonely room at the top of his house. He did not write to his family or see any friends. He grew thin and pale, his eyes wild with his terrible work. He was creating a monster, but in his madness he did not see the horror of what he was doing. On a dreary night in November, Victor Frankenstein was finally ready to bring his creation to life. The rain tapped against the windows of his workshop, and the candle was nearly burnt out. He gathered his scientific instruments and connected them to the lifeless form that lay on his table. With a feeling of great anxiety, he flipped the final switch. He watched as the creature's dull yellow eye opened. It breathed a hard breath, and its limbs began to move. But the moment of triumph quickly turned into one of absolute horror. The creature he had worked so hard to make beautiful was a hideous monster. Its skin was a sickly yellow colour, barely covering the muscles and arteries beneath. Its hair was black and flowing, and its teeth were pearly white. These features only made the rest of its appearance more terrifying. Its eyes were watery, and its face was wrinkled and ugly. Victor had dreamed of creating a beautiful being, but now he was filled with disgust and horror. He could not bear to look at the monster he had made. Victor became the creator who hated his creation. He rushed out of the room and ran to his bedchamber, hoping to find some rest. But he could not sleep. He had terrible nightmares, dreaming of Elizabeth turning into the corpse of his dead mother in his arms. He then awoke with a start to find the monster standing by his bed, its yellow eyes staring at him. The creature stretched out its hand, perhaps to touch him, and its mouth opened, making some strange sounds. But Victor was overcome with fear. He screamed and ran from the room, escaping down the stairs and into the courtyard. He spent the rest of the night pacing back and forth, terrified that the monster would find him. As morning came, he fled his house and wandered the streets of Ingolstadt. He was afraid to go back, afraid to face the terrible being he had unleashed upon the world. By chance, he saw a carriage arriving in town, and to his great relief, he saw his dearest friend, Henry Clerval, step out of it. Henry had finally convinced his father to let him study at the university. Seeing his friend brought Victor a moment of joy, but it was quickly followed by fear. He was worried the monster was still in his apartment. He brought Henry back to his rooms, but when they entered, the creature was gone. Victor was so relieved that he began to laugh and jump around like a madman. The long months of work, the shock of his creation, and the lack of sleep had finally taken their toll. Victor fell into a severe nervous fever. For many months he was terribly ill, and Henry had to nurse him back to health, knowing nothing of the secret cause of his friend's sickness. After many months of illness, Victor slowly began to recover, thanks to the dedicated care of his friend Henry Clerval. As he got better, Henry gave him a letter from his beloved Elizabeth. The letter was full of love and concern for his health. She also shared news from their home in Geneva. She wrote about Victor's younger brothers, Ernest and William, and about a young woman named Justine Moritz. Justine had been a servant in the Frankenstein household, but was treated like one of the family. She had returned to their home after her own mother died. The letter reminded Victor of the happy life he had left behind, and it made him feel a great sense of guilt and shame for his terrible secret. Victor decided to return home to Geneva as soon as he was well enough. However, his departure was delayed. He and Henry spent some time together, enjoying nature and studying languages. Victor began to feel like his old self again, and the memory of the monster started to fade. But just before he was about to leave for home, he received another letter, this time from his father. This letter brought terrible news. His youngest brother, the sweet and joyful William, had been murdered. The family had been out for a walk, and William had run off to play. When they found him later, he was dead. A locket that Elizabeth had given him was missing, and the marks on his neck showed he had been strangled. Filled with grief and a terrible sense of dread, Victor rushed back to Geneva. By the time he arrived, it was late at night, and the city gates were closed. He decided to walk to the place where his brother's body had been found. A violent thunderstorm began to rage, and the flashes of lightning lit up the dark landscape. In one of these flashes, Victor saw a terrifying figure near the trees. It was the monster, the hideous creature he had created. It was huge and deformed, and Victor knew in an instant that this monster was his brother's murderer. He was filled with horror and despair, realizing that his creation had brought death to his own family. When Victor finally returned to his family's home, he found them in deep mourning. But more terrible news was waiting for him. Justine Moritz, the kind servant, had been accused of murdering William. The missing locket had been found in her pocket. Victor knew that his servant Justine was innocent and that the monster was the real killer. But he could not tell anyone the truth. Who would believe his story about creating a monster? They would think he was insane. He was forced to remain silent as Justine was put on trial. Despite Elizabeth's passionate defense of her character, Justine was found guilty and sentenced to death. Victor was now responsible for 2 innocent deaths, and he was consumed by guilt and remorse. After the execution of the innocent Justine, Victor Frankenstein was overwhelmed by guilt and despair. He felt responsible for the deaths of both William and Justine. He tried to find peace by traveling to the mountains, hoping the beautiful scenery of the Alps would soothe his troubled soul. He journeyed to the valley of Chamonix and climbed to the summit of Montanvert, a glacier with a magnificent view of the surrounding ice and snow. But even in this majestic landscape, he could not escape his misery. He has scared, terrified, and responsible for creation of a monster and deaths of his own family members. As he stood on the glacier, he saw a figure moving towards him with incredible speed. It was the monster, his hideous creation. Victor was filled with rage and hatred. He threatened to destroy the creature, calling him a devil and the murderer of his brother. But the monster did not fight back. Instead, he spoke with a surprising eloquence and sadness. He told Victor that he was miserable and lonely, hated by all of humanity. He asked Victor to listen to his story, to understand the suffering he had endured since his creation. He promised that if Victor heard his tale and then showed him compassion, he would leave humans alone forever. Reluctantly, feeling a strange sense of duty to the being he had made, Victor agreed to listen. They went to a small hut on the mountain, and the creature began his sad story. The creature described his first moments of life. He remembered being confused by all the new sensations of light, sound, and touch. He had wandered out of Victor's laboratory into the forest, alone and afraid. He learned to find food, like berries and nuts, and to drink water from streams. He was frightened by his own reflection in the water. He learned about fire and how it could provide warmth but also cause pain. He tried to approach people in a village, but they screamed and threw things at him, driving him away. He realized that his appearance was so horrifying that no one would ever accept him. He was utterly alone in the world. Eventually, the creature found a small abandoned shed attached to a cottage. He discovered a crack in the wall which allowed him to secretly watch the family who lived inside. This family was named de Lacy. It consisted of an old blind father and his two children, Felix and Agatha. The creature watched them for many months. He learned about human language by listening to them talk. He learned about love, family, and kindness. He saw that the family was poor and often sad, and he felt sympathy for them. He even helped them by secretly gathering firewood for them at night. He began to hope that one day, if he could learn to speak their language, they might see past his ugly appearance and become his friends. The creature continued his story, telling Victor how he had learned to read. He found a lost bag of books in the woods, which included Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Young Werther. These books taught him about human society, history, and emotions. He was especially moved by Paradise Lost, seeing himself as a fallen angel, like Satan, but also as Adam, a creature abandoned by his creator. He also found Victor's journal in the pocket of the clothes he had taken from the laboratory. Reading it, he learned the horrible details of his own creation and discovered that his creator, Victor, was disgusted by him. This knowledge filled him with rage and despair. Despite this, the creature still hoped for acceptance from the de Lacy family. He decided to make his move when the old blind father was alone in the cottage. He thought that since the father could not see his hideous form, he might listen to him and show him kindness. He entered the cottage and spoke to the old man, who was indeed kind and welcoming. But just as the creature was about to reveal who he was, the children, Felix and Agatha, returned. Upon seeing the monster, they reacted with terror. Agatha fainted, and Felix, in a fit of rage, attacked the creature with a stick, driving him out of the cottage. This final brutal rejection destroyed all the creature's hopes for companionship. Filled with a burning desire for revenge against all humanity, and especially against his creator, the creature set fire to the de Lacy's empty cottage. He then decided to travel to Geneva to find Victor Frankenstein. On his journey, he saw a young girl fall into a fast-flowing river. He saved her from drowning, but when the man with her saw him, the man shot him with a gun. This cruel act further confirmed the creature's belief that all humans were his enemies. When he finally arrived near Geneva, he came across a beautiful little boy in the woods. He thought that a child might be too young to have learned prejudice and might become his friend. But when the creature approached the boy, the child screamed in terror and shouted that his father was Monsieur Frankenstein. When the creature heard the name of his hated creator, he was filled with uncontrollable rage. He seized the boy, William Frankenstein, by the throat and strangled him. He then took a locket from the boy's neck. A short time later, he found a young woman, Justine Moritz, sleeping in a barn. Hating her beauty because he could never have it, he placed the locket in her dress, framing her for the murder. After telling this horrific story, the creature made his demand to Victor. He said he would stop his campaign of terror if Victor would create a female companion for him, as hideous as himself, so he would no longer be alone in this vast world full of diversity. Victor Frankenstein was horrified by the creature's story and his demand. At first, he flatly refused to create another monster. He could not bear the thought of making a second fiend, possibly even more wicked than the first. He feared that the two creatures might hate each other, or worse, they might have children and create a race of devils that would terrorize the entire planet. The world would be in constant danger. But the creature argued passionately, promising that if Victor granted his request, He and his companion would flee to the remote jungles of South America and never be seen by humans again. He swore he would leave mankind in peace. Victor looked at his creation and felt a flicker of compassion and responsibility. He had brought this miserable being into the world and left him utterly alone. Perhaps he did owe him a companion. The creature's loneliness was a direct result of Victor's own actions. Torn between his fear for humanity and his guilt, Victor finally, reluctantly, agreed. He made the creature promise that he would leave Europe forever once he had his mate. The creature was overjoyed and promised to watch Victor's progress. Victor then returned to Geneva, his heart heavy with the terrible task that lay before him, a secret he could share with no one. To begin his dreadful work, Victor knew he needed to travel to England to gather the latest scientific information. His father, thinking a trip would help his son's gloomy mood, agreed. He also suggested that Victor should marry Elizabeth soon after his return. Victor agreed, but he knew he could not marry her with this terrible promise hanging over him. He and his friend Henry Clerval travelled together to England and then to Scotland. Wanting to be alone for his grim task, Victor left Henry with friends and travelled to a remote, desolate island in the Orkneys. There, in a small, isolated hut, he began the sickening work of creating a female companion for his monster. As he worked, his horror and doubts grew. One night, as he was piecing together the female creature, he looked up and saw the monster's face glaring at him through the window, a grin of awful expectation on its features. At that moment, Victor was overcome with revulsion. He thought of the promises the monster had made, and he realized he could not trust them. What if the female creature was evil? What if she refused to leave? What if they created a race of demons? Gap. He knew he had made a monster which is above Homo sapiens, and making a reproductive partner will eventually end humans' existence on this planet, or will lead to human slavery to these monsters and their progeny. In a fit of rage and disgust, Victor tore the unfinished female creature to pieces. The monster, seeing this betrayal, let out a howl of despair and fury. He confronted Victor and, before disappearing into the darkness, uttered a chilling threat. "I will be with you on your wedding night." After destroying the female creature, Victor Frankenstein received a letter from Henry Clerval, urging him to rejoin him and begin their journey home. Victor packed his chemical instruments and took the remains of the half-finished female creature out to sea in a small boat. He rowed far from the shore and dropped the gruesome bundle into the water, relieved to be rid of it. Exhausted, he fell asleep in the boat. When he awoke, he found that the winds had blown his boat far off course. He eventually landed on a shore that he discovered was in Ireland. As soon as he stepped onto the land, he was met by a group of hostile townspeople who accused him of a murder that had occurred the previous night. He was taken to the local magistrate, a kind man named Mr. Kerwin, who told him that a man had been found strangled on the beach. Victor was taken to see the body, and to his absolute horror, he saw that it was his dearest friend, Henry Clerval. The black marks of the monster's fingers were on his neck. Overcome with grief and guilt, Victor fell into a violent fever and remained sick for 2 months, raving like a madman. Mr. Kerwin showed him great kindness, and Victor's father, hearing of his son's illness and arrest, came to Ireland to be with him. Evidence eventually proved that Victor was on the Orkney Islands at the time of the murder, and he was released. He and his father then began the sad journey back to Geneva. Back home, Victor was a broken man, haunted by the monster's threat. "I will be with you on your wedding night." He misinterpreted this threat, believing the monster intended to kill him, not his bride. Despite his fears, he agreed to marry Elizabeth, hoping their union might bring some small measure of happiness back into his life. They were married, but the wedding day was filled with a sense of dread. For their wedding night, they travelled to a family cottage by a lake. Victor, armed with a pistol, told Elizabeth to go to bed while he searched the house for the monster. Suddenly, he heard a terrifying scream from their bedroom. He rushed in to find Elizabeth lying dead on the bed, strangled by the creature. Gap. The revenge was fulfilled. The monster wanted a companion to live peacefully, and now it will do everything so that his master will not have peace and companionship ever. The sight of his murdered wife caused Victor's father to die of a broken heart just a few days later. Now, having lost everyone he ever loved, Victor had only one purpose left in life: revenge. He devoted himself to hunting the monster to the ends of the earth. The chase led him across Europe and into the vast frozen wastelands of Russia. The monster often left clues and messages, taunting Victor and ensuring he did not give up the pursuit. This final, desperate chase eventually led Victor into the Arctic, where his dogs died and his strength gave out. It was there, on the brink of death, that he was found by Captain Walton and his crew. His long and tragic story was now told, and with his last breath, he urged Walton to continue his quest for vengeance and destroy the monster. After Victor's death, Walton was stunned to find the creature in the cabin, weeping over the body of its creator. The monster told Walton of his own immense suffering and loneliness. He explained that with his creator dead, his revenge was over, and his life had no more purpose. He then leaped from the ship onto the ice and was carried away by the waves, to be seen no more to any human ever.